Hello, my fellow makeup enthusiasts. Welcome back to my perfectly healthy expression of makeup enthusiasm. My name is Lainey, and today I'm talking a little bit more about the Anastasia Beverly Hills Norvina Volume 2 palette. I did 4 looks with this palette, and most of that was not really reviewing the palette properly. It was just showing you several looks, commenting a little bit on the textures and a little bit on the blendability, the fallout, etc. But I didn't really go in depth, and I've been meaning to for quite some time. And this is already irrelevant because Anastasia has already put out, I think, 25 new things since they came out with this, which was only a couple of weeks ago. So you know what, before I get into the review of this palette, let's talk about that. So is Anastasia releasing too much too fast? Do they have the new release runs? Yeah, they do. And I think by anyone's standards, except maybe ColourPop's, they are releasing too much too fast, and I think people are overwhelmed. I think that their fans are overwhelmed. I think that the general public who just casually likes makeup and might go into Sephora and remember how much they love the modern Renaissance palette and check out the Anastasia counter, they might go, whoa, that's a lot, and just get overwhelmed. In psychology, there is something called the paradox of choice. If you want to know more about that, I will link a video down below by a very fascinating man by the name of Barry Schwartz, and I think that hits every point that I want to make about this. People are overwhelmed, and for me, I don't feel the need to buy everything that comes out. I don't have any kind of specific loyalty to ABH. I don't have any specific loyalty to ColourPop as much as I love them. They have the new release runs all the time, and if I like something, I get it. If I'm not that interested, I don't. But I do think that a lot of people are fed up with it, and I think that they're starting to ignore the brand because they're getting overwhelmed. I think that a lot of people feel like they've been unfair to Alyssa Edwards, to Jackie Aina, to Carly Bible because they're lumped in with all of those releases, and I agree, but I still really like this palette, and I still really want to talk about it. So let me know your thoughts. Do you think that it's too much? Are you overwhelmed? Are you over Anastasia because you're just fed up with the runs that they have? Because even though I call it the new release runs, it's not crap. It's really not. So I would like to hear your thoughts. This palette does retail for $60. You can get it at abh.com, Sephora, Macy's, Beautylish, and then I looked at Nordstrom, but you can only get the Norvina Volume 1 at Nordstrom. So is it worth $60? I don't fucking know. I mean, that's an entirely subjective question. For me, on the day when I bought this, I happened to have $60 and change in my purse. I knew that my collection was lacking some blues and greens, so I felt like this filled a gap. There were enough colors in this palette that I was drawn to anyway. So for me, I was in a good mood. I buy makeup when I'm in a good mood. That's probably a problem. But for you, it might not be. This might not fill any gaps in your collection. This might not be your thing. So it's subjective. It's up to you. And I want to talk a bit about how the quality of these shadows measures up to the quality of the shadows in the typical ABH palettes. To me, the Norvina Pro Pigment palettes, these big guys over here, to me, at least based on this one, I think the quality is better. Now, I have the Alyssa Edwards palette. I like this palette a lot. I reach for it a lot. I think that the shadows are very great quality, not even good, but great quality. I don't love every single shade in this palette, but I love enough shades in this palette that I do find myself reaching for it. I was really happy when I got it. But I tend to find myself just cranking out the same exact look every time I reach for this palette. And this isn't a review of the Alyssa Edwards palette. It's good if you're drawn to this. If you love Alyssa Edwards like I do, then it's worth getting. But let's talk about this. So I also no longer have, but had the Norvina palette that is their typical ABH size, and with, I guess, the typical ABH formula, the non-subculture formula. I decluttered that palette because it was boring. I mean, it was lackluster, it was dull, I couldn't get a really vibrant, happy look with it, and so I decluttered it. It wasn't bad, but it just didn't do anything for me. So these shadows are a lot more poppin'. For the most part. They are easier to work with to me. To me, they blend better, but I have heard people on YouTube say the exact opposite. So I'm gonna say that it probably depends on your eyelids and on your taste. Now, I did pick up the ABH primer before I did my 4 looks with the Norvina 2 palette, and I gotta tell you that for me, this guy is the fucking truth. This helps my eyeshadow looks so much. But I have really oily eyelids, and so I feel like this formula might be a little bit drying and might get a little bit cakey on people that have drier eyelids. I think I was talking to Kimberly about that because I hate the Urban Decay Primer Potion, and a lot of people love that because it just turns into an oil slick on my eyelids, and this is beautiful. It honestly helps my eyeshadow. So I think if you've got oily eyelids, this might be really good for you. If you don't have oily eyelids, I don't know. I don't know how it would work for you. I also wanted to compare this palette to other palettes out there. I was talking to Carol in the comments, and she asked about how it compared to the Dragon Child palette from what is now Menagerie Cosmetics. I still haven't tried anything from Menagerie. I know I need to, but none of their palettes have really called my name. So as soon as they bust out something that really speaks to me, I will be first in line to try it. But right now, nothing's grabbing me, but I know that it's a good formula. I know that it's a good brand. So anyway, Dragon Child, that is no longer available. However, Carol told me that the singles are still available on the Menagerie website, so I will link that down below. So the blues and the greens in that palette seem pretty similar to the blues and the greens in this palette. So if you have that palette and you are into blues and greens, but maybe not so much into the shimmers or some of these darker shades in the corner or these beautiful shades, these 3 are my favorites right here, along with this gold. If you're not into those shades, but you like blues and greens, I say you don't need this. Go ahead and stick with the Dragon Child. But if you want Dragon Child Plus, and if you don't have the Dragon Child and you want something similar with a little bit of added extras, then yeah, I think you would like this. I don't know you. I don't know your taste, but probably. And I was also thinking that it might be a little bit similar to the Moschino laptop palette from Sephora that is now on sale. You can now get this guy for 30 bucks. I did a whole review and I did 5 looks with this palette. I really like this palette. My one complaint is that it's too heavy on the shimmers. I wish that there were more matte shades in this palette. So yeah, these are not at all. Not at all. I don't even know why I thought for a second that they might be similar. They're not. I also thought for a hot second that maybe this might be a little bit similar to Jeffree Star's Jawbreaker palette. It's not even. There are like 3 shades that are a little bit close, but if you have the Jawbreaker palette and you're thinking you might want this one, I mean, you can have both of these palettes in your collection, and I don't see very many redundancies at all. And finally, I wanted to compare it to the Melt Radioactive palette. So these are kind of similar, and I'm gonna let you in on a little secret. I have the Norvina 2 palette on this side. I have the Radioactive palette on this side. So I can really break down the comparisons between these 2 palettes. In fact, I should have fucking filmed that look. I will redo it and film it if you're really interested, but honestly, like at this point, I wasn't even gonna do this video because I'm thinking I don't think anybody has any interest in the Norvina 2 at this point. It's old news. So these 3 colors right here are extremely similar to my 3 favorite colors in the Norvina 2 palette, Row D, D2, D3, and D4. Yeah, I mean, I basically just busted out Laney eyes with these 2 palettes. What I will say is that the purple in the Radioactive palette, this purple right here is, I don't want to say it's trash, I don't want to call it hot garbage, but it's not that great. And you can make a really, really beautiful purple using this palette. What I did was I blended these 2 shades to just make a royal purple, and it worked really, really well. I was super pleased with it. Now, on the plus side, for Melt, I think that this shade right here, Xenon, this green, kicks the ass of any of the greens in the Norvina 2 palette. I feel like this one is probably the closest, but this is a little bit lackluster. In fact, every time I try to work with this chartreuse green shade, I have trouble with it. It just doesn't want to show up very well. My favorite green in this palette is E1. This is what I call Shields green. It reminds me of that arsenic paint that they used in Victorian England. But really, Xenon from the Radioactive palette, like I said, it has it all over any of the greens in the Norvina palette. But you do get more greens in the Norvina 2 palette. And you can mix them, you have more choices. If this neon green isn't quite your thing, then you have more options here. So again, it's up to you. I will say that I had an easier time blending the shades from the Norvina palette compared to the Radioactive palette, but I will say that the shades from the Radioactive palette are maybe a little bit more poppin', especially the yellow shade, what's it called? Neon. Neon from the Radioactive palette is a little bit more poppin' to me than D2 from the Norvina palette, but I would say that if you have the Radioactive palette, if you're not really interested in having more blues and greens, do you need the Norvina palette? No. Is the blending so much more difficult with the Radioactive palette? No, it's not that much more difficult. It's just it just takes a little bit more zhuzhing. I did want to talk a little bit about the ingredients in this palette as intelligently as I possibly can, but the thing is, there are different ingredients for almost every single shadow in this palette. If you go to the Sephora website and look up the ingredients in this palette, I think there are maybe 2 or 3 shades that have the same formula. So if you have any kind of serious allergies to any kind of ingredients that are found in eyeshadows, go through that with a fine-tooth comb, because I wouldn't want anybody to have any surprises. And another thing that I found kind of interesting is that not all of the shadows in this palette are pressed pigments. Even though this is called a pressed pigment palette, there are certain shades in here that are not actually pressed pigments, and I don't know which ones are and which ones aren't because I have no fear of pressed pigments, but I will say that there are certain shades in here that are more poppin' than others. There are a couple of shades that were a little bit wimpy, especially this one right here. Yeah, an A2 is kind of wimpy. So I'm guessing the shades that are punchier are the pressed pigments. Now, I've never, ever in my life had a problem or had any irritation, any kind of negative reaction at all to pressed pigments. I didn't experience any staining whatsoever with any of the shades in this palette, and I cranked out a lot of looks with this palette. And in addition to the 4 looks that I did for the video, I was playing with this palette for over a week, doing looks with it every single day. Never had a problem with any shade at any point. And that's all I wrote, so that's all I got. If you have any additional questions, go ahead and post them down below. I do read and respond to all of my comments. I was thinking about doing some swatches, but I know that there are 5 million videos out there of people swatching this palette, so I don't really feel like I need to add to that. Like I said, I feel like I'm a little bit late to the game in getting out this additional review of this palette. I don't feel like there's very much interest right now, and I think that that's a shame because I really do think that this is a great palette, and I wish that Anastasia would slow their roll. I really do, because I think that they are alienating people by just overwhelming them. And maybe they're not, but I really, just from what I've heard from other YouTubers and just comments in the community, I think that people are overwhelmed, and it's a shame. So that wraps it up for today. As always, thank you so very much for joining me. Follow me on Instagram. I will follow you back. Throw me a pity like. Give me some encouragement to make some more videos. Very special shout out to you if you are watching this video on the toilet. And until next time, stay adorably obsessed with makeup.